Hello, thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I'm David Pendergrass. I want to reflect just for a moment on something that I have never heard preached on or taught on in my entire life in church. And I have preached on this, but I had preached on it before, and I just wanted to reflect on it some with you. And that is something Jesus says in Mark chapter 12, verse 31. A man comes up to Jesus and asks, "What's the greatest commandment?" Now, it was not weird in Judaism to think of all the commandments historically. Traditionally, there are 613 commandments, and they break those down to which ones are prohibitive and which ones are suggestive, that is, don't do and versus do. But having said that, that's when my son would say, "You said do." It's all for Jesus. That's right. That's where our mind is. Jews would think about commandments very seriously, but it was not uncommon for them to narrow them down to what they would consider hegemony. That is, what are the most important rules? And it's said that the rabbis like to do that. In fact, in the prophets, they did it. Malachi brings it down to, what does God ask of you? But to what? Love justice, walk humbly with your God, love mercy, so forth. So you narrow it down just a few key teachings, a few key commandments. And so when this man comes up to Jesus and asks what's the greatest one, we would assume, and it's a fair assumption, that it's a somewhat common question for Jews to ask. So Jesus, who's respected as a teacher, in fact, the number one title given to Jesus in the Gospels is teacher. They treat him like a teacher. And teacher, what's the greatest one? So we've read a lot of different Jewish teachers and prophets who say what the greatest commandments, which one do you think are? And Jesus quotes, of course, from Deuteronomy 6 and from Leviticus 19, and he says, love God with everything you are, your heart, soul, strength, or mind. The order is different in Mark and Luke. It's different, but it's still all the same four: heart, soul, mind, and strength, or strength and mind, depending on the gospel you read. And then, of course, and love your neighbor. He says, and the second one is this, and you love your neighbor as yourself, quoting from Leviticus 19:18. He says, there are no greater commandment greater than these. So for Jesus, the two top summation commandments are loving God, loving neighbor. But that last bit, loving your neighbor as yourself, isn't reflected on much in Christianity. And so I just want to reflect a few moments on what I think it means, and I think in the biblical understanding. Love your neighbor as yourself means, of course, that you take care for your neighbor's well-being as much as you care for your own. So love your neighbor as yourself means to care for your neighbor's well-being or your neighbor's good, or to do good to your neighbor as much as you do good for your own self, or to care for your neighbor's well-being as much as you care for your own. There are certain verses that let us know that's exactly what love means, like in Luke chapter 6, when Jesus says to love your enemy, do good to those who curse you or harm you. You pray for them, you do not persecute, you do not curse them. So love and to do good are synonymous. So we know that Jesus has in mind here an action to care for someone's good, to do good to them. It is not about a feeling. So loving our neighbor doesn't mean we have to like the neighbor or the person in front of us. It just means we have to care for their good or to do good for them, or as I say, to care for their well-being. So we love our neighbor as much as we love ourselves. Well, what is it in the world does it mean to love myself? What does it mean to love myself? Well, of course, it means simply to care for my own good. To care for my own good. This is typically where Christians and the good old Christian guilt comes to play and say, yeah, David, what about that joy, J-O-Y, the acronym Jesus, others, and yourself? Isn't it selfish to care for my own good? The answer is no. It is not selfish to care for your own good because Jesus commands it. Love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. Well, implicit is the command to love yourself. It is not selfish. It's not bad or greedy or sinful or wretched to care for your own good. In fact, there's nothing more natural than that. I believe God designed our brain for that survival mechanism. We, by instinct, want to care for ourselves. What can be sinful, what is sinful, is when we choose to care for our own good at the expense of caring for others' goods. So, if I only think about my own good, if I only care about myself, well, then I'm not being like Christ. But it is not bad to care for my own good. So in general, is joy correct? Jesus, others, and yourself, the order of the importance? In general, sure, that's good. In general in life, I like to think I care about what Jesus would do and what he cares about first, and I want to care for other people's feelings. Absolutely. In general, that's true, but specifically, that's not true. Specifically, I drank water this morning, and I did not think, about all the people in the world who need water, and I stopped everything I'm doing to go help build wells for them around the world. That is, it just depends on the moment. But in the moment, if my neighbor needs water, I want to make sure my neighbor has water. And then, of course, I care about my own water too. But there you go. So is it sinful to care about your own needs? No. We want to care for our own good. Jesus commanded it. It just means in general, we do want to make sure we're looking out for other people's goods. Well, so that's what loving our neighbor as ourselves means, to care for my neighbor's well-being as much as to care for my own. But how can I love or care for or do good to myself? How can I love or care for myself? There are many things you could say about this, many ways you can think about caring for yourself. I want to reflect just on a few, I think, very big ones. Very big ones, I think, that can be demonstrated from the text, but oftentimes these are just assumed. And some of these just come from good Christian psychology. So I'm bringing a lot of things to bear on this, but you can't find a Bible verse or theme or verses that specifically say, here's how to love yourself. But I think you can certainly deduce this as a Christian. So therefore, I think it's authoritative based on what I think is from the text in general. One way we care for ourselves is taking care of our physical self, our bodies. And so the question I would ask you to reflect on is, what habits do I have that care for my body? What habits do I have that care for my body? Really think about that for a second. What habits do you have? And habits are what you have, by the way. Studies demonstrate that over 90% of what we do in one day is the same thing as the day before. We are habitual creatures. It's a good thing because we want that part of our brain that when it operates well, it allows us to take energy that we could have been spending on other things. We don't think very hard about walking until we've been injured. We don't want to do that. We want to have a habit of walking so we can focus on other things. Our mind can wander to other things that need to be doing. So we have habits all the time, good or bad. What habits do you have that care for your body, though? For example, the big three. Big three habits that everyone should have very much as Christians. If you're loving yourself, you should have healthy habits about food. Food is fuel. Food is fuel. Whether you like it or not, as soon as it leaves your tongue and gets down to your throat, you can't taste it, and your body's going to burn it up or kick it out, make you fat, make you healthy, something. It's just fuel. So what are your habits that show that you love yourself? Many, 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 many people in America do not love themselves in this regard. They eat constant junk food, snack food, and whatever, and they don't care. I know people who say, I don't care what I do because I would rather die happy and fat than I would, they would say skinny and hungry. Well, they've made their mind up. So their habits, they're not loving themselves. And it's very difficult to love a person and go out and do mission trips and help anybody at all if you're so obese you can't do anything about it. Now, some people have gland issues, some people have health issues, some people are genuine victims, some people have handicapped issues. Of course, I'm not talking about people who are genuine victims. I'm not people who don't have good habits with their food. They're just gluttons. And they're not loving themselves. If that's you, I would encourage you to stop hating yourself. Start loving yourself and treat yourself well by eating healthy food. In general. It doesn't mean you can't eat sugar in your entire life. It just means in general, food is a way you can love yourself because that helps you fulfill your duties for the kingdom of God. So those are the two big things. So food, exercise, and rest. Exercise, some general exercise that God designed our bodies to move. The more we're sedentary, the worse it gets. The more your back's going to hurt, all that stuff. And of course, third is rest. Christians should be good at resting. Not lazy, but resting. Resting is very important. Christians don't celebrate Sabbath or Shabbat. That's Friday through Saturday. You can if you want to, but Christianity does not teach that you're supposed to celebrate Sabbath or Shabbat. But resting is important. Sabbath rest is important because it tells us we don't worship productivity. We don't worship always going and work. We have to have times of rest. Rest every day, good sleep, and there's at least some time during the weekend that you do not do anything. You've got to break. You've got to rest. Give your mind a rest, your brain a rest, your body a rest. So these are three big things that you can help to love yourself physically. What habits do I have that care for my body, that love myself by that way? Or do you hate yourself in these regards? Are you hurting your physical self? So physical aspect, that's how we can love ourselves. Another big issue, of course, what I would call quote unquote spiritual. I don't like the word spiritual because it's so overused and it sounds like a watered down psychology. But I'll do that because I believe that our soul, or the spirit, the aspect of ourselves that relates to God, can be fostered, it can grow, it can be matured. So I ask the question this way, or I encourage you to ask yourself, what habits do I have that care for my discipleship? What habits do I have that care for my discipleship? Or that care for my soul's growth? What do I do? Because you can, in fact, increase or decrease your ability to be more like Jesus. There are things you can do. So, do you have habits that demonstrate you are loving yourself and you're loving your growth? There are certain things that Christians for centuries have suggested are very important when it comes to growing and loving yourself in this regard. And these are the biggies, of course: Bible study and prayer and worship, service, fasting, whatever. But these things are spiritual disciplines that really do affect you. Having a healthy Bible study, a devotional life. For example, if you only read the Bible, if your main reading time of the Bible is on a Sunday sermon, you're not growing well. You're not loving yourself well. If the most you ever pray is on a Sunday morning at church, you're not loving yourself well. You have a lot more growth to do. If the only time you ever worship God is when there's a song sung on a Sunday morning, then you're not loving yourself well enough in your spiritual development. If the only time you ever serve is with another Christian in another group because someone compels you or they ask you to or you feel guilty, you're not loving yourself in this regard. So how can you love yourself or care for yourself in this regard? You have spiritual disciplines, habits that you put into place that help your soul mature and grow. That's how you be more like Jesus. It sure is hard to know what Jesus would do if you don't know what he taught. It sure is hard to know how to hear the voice of God if you never pray. It sure is hard to stop worrying if you're not good at worshiping. See, a lot of times worshiping and singing songs, poems, praying, just talking to him, praising God, a lot of times worship is just a way of showing gratitude. And even satanic psychologists, or even pagans will tell you, one of the best things you can do to help your worrying go away is to focus on what you're grateful for. And Christians fully grasp, I say that loosely, but we fully grasp that we have nothing but gratitude for what God has done and how far he's brought us and how we didn't deserve to be saved, but he saved us. He didn't have to save us, but he did, and he's doing it, and one day he'll do it in full. Worship helps that. See, there are spiritual habits that help our discipleship mature, and it shows us, and it shows God, that we are loving ourselves. We're caring for our own good by having these habits. So we can care for our physical well-being by having healthy habits in food, exercise, and rest. We have healthy habits in our spiritual life or discipleship life by Bible study and devotional and prayer and worship and service. You might even say fasting, being in community, being morally accountable. There's all kinds of things Christians can do to love themselves this way. The last of the third big things, it seems to me, that are ways you love yourself. Now, I could add a lot of other things to this, okay, but we could say mental things, there's all kinds of stuff. But this third big one is what I call the emotional self. What habits do I have that care for my emotional health or love myself in this way? Most men, not all, but most men are what we call in Myers-Briggs a thinker type. And so most men live in the cerebral world all the time. That's all they really care about. They forget that they're emotional creatures, and so they're not good at it. It scares them, and so they don't spend much energy here. Where most women are feeler types, so they're very good at spending time with their emotions. So women tend to naturally care for themselves and their emotional good more than men do. So if you're a man listening to this, I encourage you it's time to grow up. Get used to saying things like, this makes me feel, or asking questions how to make me feel. So one way you can love yourself emotionally is, of course, developing, I'm going to say it, habits that help you care for your emotional health. Now, there's a whole lot here. There are, I might say, three big things when it comes to emotional health. So like I had big three for physical, and I had some big things for spiritual. Here are the three big categories I could spend a long time on, but I won't right now, on the emotional ways to care for your emotional well-being. The first thing is this. One way you demonstrate you love yourself and your emotional well-being is by having healthy relationships. God, all through the Bible, demonstrates that healthy relationships, friendships, And just right relationships with fellow sisters and brothers in Christ is the way we get all kinds of, like Cloud Townsend, these Christian psychologists say it, we get our nutrients. If you read the New Testament carefully, for example, like in Paul's letters, almost every time Paul is encouraged, he's encouraged because another Christian comes and encourages him. He doesn't say, I was deep in prayer and depression in my prison cell, and the Spirit just encouraged me. That can happen, but typically in his life, his ministry, and also in almost any Christian's ministry and life, we get encouraged by other people. We get challenged by other people. The nutrients we need to live life effectively in our emotional well-being is through healthy relationships. We need them. You need them. We all need at least one trusted Christian friend to whom we can go and who they know all about us. I mean, they know our wounds, our failures, our sins, and we are vulnerable and we're safe. And they love us in spite of that, and we love them in spite of their failures and wounds. And sometimes we can't find that person off the bat, and sometimes what Christian therapists are for. But when we can't find a friendship that way, it's even more powerful because it's equally vulnerable. Healthy relationships are a way we can love ourselves. So do you love yourself by seeking healthy relationships? It's healthy because you're equally vulnerable and safe and loving. You're not pretending, you're not fake, you're not a phony, and they don't judge you. I know people, well, I think of one person in particular. My wife knows a person who has these quote-unquote friends, and she'll say, and so-and-so said this about me. And that's like her best friend. My wife one day finally said, she's not a good friend. I'm not laughing at her. I mean, it's just sad. Oh my goodness, these are not your good friends if they said these kinds of things. If you leave more discouraged and more condemned before you came into a relationship, that's not a good friendship. So healthy relationships are a very powerful way to have a healthy love for yourself. The second thing is having healthy internal dialogue is one way you can have a healthy emotional self. You care for your well-being. Our internal dialogue is that conscious narrative we have. So when we're not sleeping, as long as we're awake, the thoughts you have. I need to go to the restroom. I wonder if I'd have paid that bill. Hey, it's time to go to work. Or I don't want to do this. Or I love so-and-so. It's the things you say to ourselves on the inside. Our mind is saying these things. Well, having healthy internal dialogue means we focus on things that are, as Paul calls it in Colossians, things of above, not things, earthly things. We hold captive the bad ones. We block them. It doesn't mean we deny when we have sad feelings. It just means the internal dialogue is powerful. So a question I ask people all the time when I do counseling or when I do marriage retreats and so forth is to ask the question, if someone attached a megaphone to your soul and your mind, it could transmit your mind's thoughts and a megaphone, would you be proud or embarrassed if the world heard what you said about yourself? Would you be embarrassed or would you be proud if the world heard what you said about yourself? So many people have horrible internal dialogue. They beat themselves up on the inside. They judge themselves incessantly. I hear it all the time when I counsel people. All the time. And within the first session, I lay down a ground rule to say, okay, in here, I'm going to do my best to help you, that this is a no judgment zone. It's a no judgment zone. This is not the time to say, I know I'm weird, but I know this is stupid, but that's judging, condemnatory thoughts, and they don't help. You can't grow where you're being constantly condemned. You can't grow. You have to have grace and redemption. That's why God gives us grace. He redeems us and gives us grace. That allows us to grow. When we've repented of our sins and so forth, of course. But a healthy internal dialogue is very important because it means we say true things about ourselves that God says about us. The third thing about ways to encourage you to think about how you can love your emotional health is by having healthy boundaries, healthy limits. And so you care for your emotional health because a boundary is a limit of where you spend your time, energy, resources. We have limits, and we have a fence in my backyard. There's a fence in my backyard, so it limits. It's a boundary of my property line. Now, everything inside of my property line is my responsibility. Everything outside of that is not my responsibility. I can help my neighbor cut her grass if I so chose, but I'm not morally responsible to do it because it's not my property. Well, in life, it's that way too. I can try to help my friend's sadness by encouraging him, That's a treat for him. It is not my moral responsibility to help him because he's outside of my fence. What is my moral responsibility is to take care of my own needs first, to make sure that God gets the best of me. And so many people cannot say no. They're people pleasers, or they can't say no to money, so they overspend. They can't say no to time, so they're never good with their time management. They can't say no again to food, to sex, to substances, and they are just demonstrating that they hate themselves. They're not taking care of their own good. They're overextended. They're burnt out. Instead, what happens, they're not loving their neighbor. They are doing what they're doing for the neighbor because they're driven by guilt. They're driven by guilt messages. And that's a form of manipulation. That's not based on freedom. Love is free. Love is free. Hey, neighbor David, can you come over and cut my grass? Yes. Because I want to. If I said, well, okay, yeah. Well, David, why are you cutting that grass? I just feel so bad. I can't say no. Well, you're not loving your neighbor. You're not loving your neighbor. In that instance, if I were to cut the grass out of guilt or manipulation, it's not because I love my neighbor. Let that sink in. It's not because I love my neighbor. I would cut the grass because I don't know how to process the anxiety I feel because of not wanting to hurt the person's feelings. In other words, I'm cutting the grass for me, to assuage my guilt, to deal with my anxiety. It's not for my neighbor. Almost every person I've ever counseled before who has this kind of anxiety, they think they're doing it for someone's good, but they're not. They're actually doing it for selfish reasons. They're doing it so they feel good about themselves, so that they calm their anxiety. They feel their guilt goes away. They're not doing it for the neighbor at all. So they're not loving their neighbor. They're not loving themselves. They're just trying to deal with that anxiety. Healthy boundaries allow us to have healthy emotional states so that when I do say yes to help, when I do go help the poor and the homeless and whatever, I do it freely, which demonstrates I'm loving my neighbor. But it also, of course, demonstrates I love myself to know my own limits. One of my favorite lines, there's a show called The West Wing. I think the best show ever done. One of my favorite lines in the show was when President Bartlett, he's being hounded by CJ. I think it was CJ, the press secretary, who was hounding him and saying, where were you here? And we need to do this, and why are you doing this, and whatever. We need to see you more often, whatever. And President Bartlett says, you don't get all of me. That's one of my favorite lines in all the show, and I've seen all 8 seasons several times. And it's because of the boundary he sets there. You don't get all of me. Now, if he were right here speaking through me, he would say, you don't get all of me because I love myself too much. And that's how I feel even with church work. The church doesn't get all of me. I've told everybody. I told them when I came here on the search team was trying to find me. And I've told people since then, the church does not get all of me. I have a life that's not just the church. I have a family. I have some friends. I have some other hobbies. I do not spend, now my mind is almost always thinking about the church, almost always thinking of the sermon, the things to do. But I also have to, and I do, exercise mental boundaries as much as I can to have a break, because breaks are healthy. Breaks give me a chance to love myself and rest. Because I love myself. And because I love myself, I cannot run out of juice or I'll be no good to anybody. And I don't want to give, and I will not give because I'm being manipulated or guilty. Well, do you love yourself? Jesus says to love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. Do you? Do you have habits in place that demonstrate you love yourself? Or do you have habits in place in any area of your life that demonstrate that you are not being a friend to yourself, but an enemy? Is your food habits or your eating habits, do they demonstrate that you don't like yourself? What about your relationships? What about your spiritual disciplines, the Bible study and prayer? Do you demonstrate that you don't care much for yourself? Does your internal dialogue demonstrate that you don't really like yourself? I encourage you, friend, to get good at these areas. Look at these areas carefully. If you need help, there's all kinds of literature out there that you can read. Go find a Christian therapist. Figure out what's going on and why it is you want to beat yourself up, why it is you don't love yourself. Where does that come from? A lot of people have, I know I'm going to say this very quickly, but this is a long podcast too. A lot of people I counsel through the years cannot love themselves well in any regard, or maybe in one area, because they never felt it as a kid. They never felt unconditional love from their parents or their authority figures, and so they have a hard time doing it in the adult stage. To them, it's almost impossible. It doesn't make sense to them. If you're like that, there's hope for you. Do not give up. There is hope for you. You can learn to love yourself. You can do it. You're not thinking highly of yourself more than other people. I'm more important than everybody else. Remember, I've never said that one time. Loving yourself means caring for your good. We just want to care for our own good, so that when we do love our neighbor, we have reserves. We've got gas in our tank to help someone else. Because why? Because we care for ourselves too, and we would do it freely. And we have more energy to give, more resources of ourselves to give, because we've been loving ourselves. Doesn't mean it's selfish. Doesn't mean it's unhealthy or sinful. Just means it's healthy. Don't give up. God bless you. Think on such things, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you want more, go to davidpendergrass.com. davidpendergrass.com. If you look at the top, you'll see various tabs that have sermons I've preached, a link to all the podcasts I've done so far, a link to my consulting website. For more information about my consulting, see davidpendergrassconsulting.com. Also, you'll see information about the books I've written that are found on amazon.com. So davidpendergrass.com, one-stop shop, all that you need. If you want to reach out to me, follow me on Twitter at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass, and send me a message. I'll see you online. I gotta run and tell about what the Lord has done for me.